So, hello everyone. We are very fortunate today to have as our guest Stijn Vanheule, and we will be talking about his brand new book, Why Psychosis is Not So Crazy, which is an excellent text. In some ways, it's a kind of not really a follow-up, but you could say that is the successor to an earlier book, which I think, Stijn, is 2013, The Subject of Psychosis, a Lacanian Perspective.
Yeah.
Very different in style, and it's a very useful book to recommend to students, to people who have experienced psychosis, to family and friends of people who have, or anyone trying to understand psychotic experience. So, Stijn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. It's my pleasure, of course, to talk about this book, because that's why I write these books, that we can read the book and discuss it. So yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, let me start you off with a question then. Towards the beginning of the book, you make a remark about the relationship between madness and freedom, and then you give us a quote from Lacan that you found inspiring, and that I think is still inspiring. And so maybe we could ask you about that. But here's the phrase. You say earlier on in the book, around page 20, Lacan regarded madness as a limited experience of human freedom, meaning an experience in which our capacity for astonishment, creative invention, and non-conformist action is expressed to the fullest. And then you directly quote Lacan, and this is the quote: "Not only can man's being not be understood without madness, but it would not be man's being if it did not include madness within itself as the limits of this freedom." Can you tell us a little bit about why you found this quote so inspiring?
Well, because for me there, Lacan articulates something of a vision, something of an idea about what the human being is. And I think that especially in a context like psychosis, this is very important, because today, in our contemporary society, we do have something of a fatalistic view on psychosis, meaning that usually it's seen as a biological question, as a matter of the brain, and there it is often seen as a very serious illness, and you will decline, your functioning will decline. People also think that once people have had a psychotic episode, that their functioning will be bad, that they will remain psychotic in a certain sense, like in a manifest sense, like there will continue to be delusions, and often also connected to a very negative idea about the dangerousness of people, and also about them not being reliable, not being accountable, and therefore many reasons to avoid interacting with them, and therefore to exclude them from our common interactions, like at the work settings, in friendships. And then we have the whole problem of stigmatization that is connected to psychosis. And although there is a counter movement, the fact that there is a counter movement kind of proves that there is a dominant view on psychosis. And therefore, I thought that what Lacan says about it is so refreshing, because it's a completely different perspective. It's not about the illness, it's not about dangerousness of psychosis, but it's what he calls, it has to do with something of freedom. And that's kind of surprising, because people tend to think that when you are psychotic, you're like locked in your ideas and you're fixed in your opinions, which is indeed like the more ancient, like the medieval idea about psychosis, like you being fixed in some ideas. So idée fixe, like the French expression is like indeed having the fixed idea. And Lacan adds something of freedom and something about humanity that is like being expressed in psychosis. And so I thought that these key ideas, like man's being, meaning like humanity as what it is to be a human being, psychosis is exemplary of it, and of the freedom. And so, of course, the question is, what does Lacan mean it with it? But at least it's something of an eye opener, and therefore, I think that as a starting point, as a point of conceptualizing what psychosis is, such a very broad opening perspective is actually most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the way you're explaining it and the context of how you speak about it is that this is a kind of refrain which dislodges a whole series of presumptions, prejudices, and notions. And, although Lacan is saying this in 1950, you could say that the comment is still as important today, for the reasons you've just said, as it was then. It also, of course, links to an idea that becomes very apparent in your book, particularly towards the later sections, well, all the way through, where psychosis is, in a sense, an opportunity for, and I'm creating you again, creative invention, non-conformist actions. And you give some lovely examples of that, and hopefully we can come back to that. So just to note that, I think those examples are very important because it kind of moves us away from theorizations of psychosis as a deficit, as multiple levels of deficit, to thinking about what can be done.
Yeah.
So, well, actually, now that I've mentioned it, were there some examples of that that you would like to bring to our attention?
Yes, of course. But first, I would like to say something else because you use the word deficit,
Yeah.
and I think that's also an important one to tackle because in the Lacanian view, if there is something of a deficit, it is a deficit we're all struggling with, meaning like not specifically people who are prone for psychotic crises in their lives. We're all like struggling with something that does not work, and that's exactly what that sentence of well, that man's being cannot be understood without madness, and that it's an expression of the ultimate freedom. So for me, that it's connected to that. So a basic idea behind it, which I also wanted to stress, is that well, this view of Lacan connects with actually with Freud's idea about the trieb, so about the drive, which is distinct from instinct. And as a human being, we do have instinctual roots in how we act, but biology is not telling us entirely what we should do, like in the crucial points of life, like not when we are breathing. That goes quite automatically. That's biology that is just doing its work. But when we are encountering people, when we live with a partner, with children, then there might be a biological aspect of attraction, but there is freedom because biology is not saying everything. And this is, I think, the freedom like Lacan is pointing to. And why would then psychosis be the ultimate confrontation with that freedom? Because I think that within that Lacanian model, neurosis means that we believe in convention, that conventional thinking and something of an epistemic trust in how things go, meaning like how the world interacts, is taken for granted. And therefore, it's a way of neglecting or forgetting the freedom that we have because we feel obliged to act in a certain sense. We are indoctrinated by society. We believe what our parents said to us. That's neurosis. And so, in that respect, neurosis is a question of how we kind of do not use the freedom that we have, and we recognize that possibility. And so we do think in neurosis that we don't have a choice. Whilst, of course, psychoanalysis, of course, the confrontation with you do have a choice. But in psychosis, we don't have to open that question of you do have a choice, because there it's rather the kind of experience that is connected to finding nothing to hold on in convention. Like convention is not guiding you. It's more like the brutal confrontation with things in life and
Yeah.
just experience of having nothing to hold on to. And so therefore it is like an ultimate proof, well, through suffering, of course, with something of that human freedom. And so when Lacan is stressing that, I think he's kind of inviting us to indeed to, as an analyst, and you could say more broadly as a society, to be there for people, because it is the ultimate expression of something that as a humanity, we are vulnerable we are vulnerable because we actually don't know, and we do believe that we have some solutions and some solutions that have worked in the past for other people that might be relevant for us, and we try to inspire one another with what we believe, with our convictions, like political convictions, societal convictions, convictions for how to live your life. And psychosis is the confrontation with the limits of that. And so therefore it's something very interesting, you could say, for a human being to also to explore the question of madness, being it the madness in yourself or the psychosis in yourself, or the madness or the psychosis in your neighbor, and how someone who is close to you might be overwhelmed by it. It's a challenge for all of us, therefore, not just for the people suffering from psychosis, but also for all of us to question what we do and to maybe be open to reinvention, because psychotic episodes only occur because the neurotic solutions are not like covering everything we are struggling with. It are just defenses, collective defenses, and personal defenses against something. And so the psychosis is an invitation to kind of reevaluate and to kind of explore that possibility. And now I'm going to your question that I kind of went away from. I think that art is also doing something at that level. So people who make art, and I refer to several of them like Yayoi Kusama or David Lynch, these are also people that explore the possibility of reality not being as straightforward as we think it is. And so therefore, for me, there is a clear link between artists' production and what people who are experiencing psychosis are working with. So there is something of a parallel between, and also I think therefore at the level of finding a solution for psychosis, there is a possibility in creative artistic work.
That I think is extremely helpful. Just, I mean, it makes me think that one of the challenges, if one is a thoroughly neurotic clinician, okay, not looking at anyone in particular, but anyways, if you're a thoroughly neurotic clinician, the dimension of freedom, as it's just been explained by you, in someone who is potentially having a psychotic experience, can be kind of a challenge, right? Because it's a freedom that in a neurotic life, one tends to not avail oneself of. But maybe just to build on that question or slightly take a different turn, which is kind of still linked to it. But you've got a nice moment when you say, and I'll read the quote, it's on page 156, when you're talking about, well, my theme here is, in what ways does a psychotic episode, a psychotic moment, enable a communication of sorts? How do we think the communicativeness of psychosis? So here's the quote from you that I link to that question. You say, according to Lacan, delusions and hallucinations are elusive, as they reflect the topics that disturb the experience of self while passing on messages to the ego. So the messages to the ego, I think, is important. But you continue and you say, this means not only that psychotic experiences convey topics that are relevant to understanding what one is struggling with, but also that psychosis provides a person with suggestive fragments of an alternative identity. So could you tell us something about how psychosis communicates, or what is communicated in the experience of psychosis?
Yeah, here, of course, there is a direct link with the idea of the unconscious. So as a psychoanalyst, I do think that psychotic experiences are actually unconscious articulations. While in neurosis, unconscious articulations, you could speak, are occurring within consciousness, because there is dreams that we have, and the dreams are communicating something. Or what Freud said, like, the symptom is a rebus, and if I have a symptom, it's up to me to read what I'm experiencing. And then, of course, the idea is that in psychosis, well, there might also be like this internal experience of something other, but there is an additional dimension, which is like something of otherness is invading in life, in reality, in real life. And then we have these communications through hallucinations, through signs that, the kind of signs that delusions build upon. But these are communications in reality, but actually, psychoanalytically speaking, it are unconscious communications, meaning that they allude to the things that at a subjective level have been very difficult for someone. You could say that they allude to what is real for that specific individual, real in Lacanian sense, like unimaginable, like disruptive. But therefore, it's something singular, because what is disruptive for one person is not necessarily disruptive for another one. So therefore, it's something very personal. So it's an illusion because it's a communication to something of a very difficult confrontation. So that means that it, in a certain sense, makes sense, because not that it's very sensical and very comprehensible, but it's not random. What is being communicated in a psychotic experience. It's not like dust in the brain. It's not like dust in consciousness. It's specific. It's person specific. What is happening there? So I think that's a very important thing to take into mind. And therefore, it's reflecting something of a struggle. And then also particular in psychosis is that it is experienced by an individual as directed towards themselves. It's a personal communication. It's a voice that I'm hearing. It's not my neighbor or my partner that is hearing the voice. It's me. So I'm targeted by it. So therefore, it's always linking to something of the I, of the subject. Something of the subject is being appealed to through the psychotic experience. But yeah, the subject, you could say, fails to situate it relative to the other ideas that the subject that make up the subject. So it's something of a paradox. It's something confusing, but it does make sense. And therefore, it's something of a suggestion. And in the psychotic experience itself, the suggestion is often offensive or
Yeah,
surprising
yeah.
for the individual. But for the psychoanalyst, it's of course the question here, like, okay, but what is being pointed to through that experience? And so it's not random. And then our job as a psychoanalyst, but maybe more broadly, when we want to organize mental health care for people with vulnerability for psychotic episodes, should be to have a certain sense of openness and a certain discipline of listening, not just listening to the here and now, but listening to people's stories and experiences in a more associative way. Because for me, it are wild associations that occur in a psychotic experience. And so therefore, when we want to be there for them, we also have to enter their living world, and also to use our own associativeness to work with it.
Yeah, it's a really good way of highlighting, thinking about the communicative message nature of psychosis. I think underlies the fact that many of us within society, and society as such, isn't very good at receiving those messages, right? Like, because often one would rather not be addressed in those terms, and it's frightening to be exposed to some of that messaging, to put it in those terms. So I think you've said something important about what the significance of the analyst's role is in being someone who's willing to receive and
Yeah.
willing to listen. And also not just being willing to listen, to willing to receive, but to offer some response to the messages the person might be sending to themselves. So I think that's very useful.